Welcome to Murder Mile UK True Crime. This isn't a video, it's an audio experience. The only images you'll need for this episode are these. So close your eyes, open your mind, and savour the sounds of Murder Mile. Thursday the 18th of March 1993 at 6:55 p.m. Outside of Omica at 149 Kings Road in Chelsea, Peter waits. His forehead sweats, his heart pounds, the bleach burns on his face sting, and his right ankle tingles. Inside of his brown leather jacket is stashed a claw hammer. Only this isn't about death, it's about love. For 10 years, Peter had loved Nisha. For the last 6, by his count, she'd loved him back. It began as teasing, jokes and giggles. But being so close, he said that they'd found a love that she had hidden from her parents. It had progressed beyond kissing to rubbing and touching, always initiated by her. But every time they got close, her mother pulled her away, and he feared that her father would send her to India. Since he'd been sacked, Nisha was never allowed alone in the shop. But as Michael was out, Rita headed upstairs to make dinner, and Bobby fetched in the pavement sign. Peter saw his chance to talk to Nisha. Told in full for the very first time, this is Schizophrenic. The real fake Peter Bryan, Part 2. When he entered the shop, Nisha was on the phone, blanking him.
It was time to find out where I stood with her,
he later said. And although he waited, still feeling buzzed from the wine, the weed, smashing a car and breaking some windows, he hadn't the patience, and he slammed down the receiver. 23 and still a virgin, Peter's sexual frustration fizzed. As every time she teased him, going hot and cold, turning him on and then blowing him off, she'd rub her breasts against him and then just as quickly she turned to stone. But this encounter would be different. Right then, with her parents out,
she started kissing me,
Peter said. But it was as she started touching him that she grabbed him and demanded, "Make me. Rape me." Peter was shocked, horrified.
I knew the relationship had to end or move on,
he thought. So with the half-kilo claw hammer balled up in his tight, sweating fist,
my hand went up, and that was that. I hit her 3 or 4 times.
Hard across the head.
She didn't shout or anything. She just stood there and took it. I had the strong impression that Nisha wanted me to kill her. She didn't tell me to stop, because she didn't give a damn and she wanted to get out.
And as she hit the floor, he hit her twice more and walked away. Peter recalled this in interviews with noted psychiatrists across the decades. And yet, not a single word of it was true, except in his head, as witnesses and survivors told a very different story. Born on the 1st of February 1973 in Hampstead, North London, Nisha Menhidra Sheth was Michael and Rita's only daughter. To her friends, neighbours and even strangers, she was quiet, clever, a lovely girl, intelligent and charming. She was loyal to the shop, loving to her family, and having obtained 3 A-levels at college and secured a place at South Bank University to study a degree in social science, she made her parents very proud. She didn't have a boyfriend, But then she didn't want to have a boyfriend, as her future held a bright career. And although over the last 10 years she'd been both a friend and a colleague to Peter, it was nothing more. Nobody knows why he killed her, except Peter. But was this reason a delusion or reality? This was the truth. Peter deliberately waited until Nisha was alone. Storming into the shop, he smashed Bobby twice across the head with the claw hammer, rendering the 12-year-old boy senseless as he crashed to the floor. And seeing the seething attacker wielding a bloody hammer, the shop's customers fled. Nisha screamed, terrified, as grabbing her roughly, Peter threw her down, and with barely a grunt, he rained down 6 hard blows onto her head, smashing open her skull until her brain tissue was exposed. Staggering and bleeding profusely, having gained some consciousness, Bobby ran into the street and frantically rang the flat's doorbell to alert his mother, as Nisha lay broken and smashed. Passers-by stared in shock, passengers recoiled in horror, and although one man bravely chased her killer down Chelsea Manor Street, after a few roads, he lost sight of him. That was the reality of this brutal murder. It took less than 30 seconds, and Peter never said a word. Police and ambulances were on the scene within minutes, as Rita wailed and held her dying daughter tight. Miraculously, Bobby survived, as with 2 glancing blows, he only needed a few stitches. But as Peter's intended target, Nisha got the full force of his fury. Transferred to Hammersmith Hospital, Michael, her father, sat by her bedside, pleading, "Please, don't leave me." But that night, she died of her injuries. For several years, the family stayed on the King's Road, saying, "She loved it here, so we tried to carry on as if she still is. But every corner reminds us of her." In her bedroom were her dolls, her school reports, a signed photo of Cindy Crawford, and although still painfully grieving, the family stayed strong for each other. But as Michael said, time doesn't heal. It stopped for us that day, but the numbness blows you to pieces. Detective Chief Superintendent Clive Ritchie described it as a cowardly and horrific attack. Witnesses came forward, and the police cars were on the lookout for Peter Bryan, who was armed and dangerous. In his retelling to psychiatrists, he'd later claim, "After this, my mind went blank." Yet he said a woman at a bus stop pleaded for him to kill her, asking, "What about me?" That he dumped the bloody hammer by her door, but not in the River Thames, which he later passed. And at 7:05 p.m, as he crossed Battersea Bridge, he claimed that while high on skunk, drink and adrenaline, he went searching for a place to take his own life. At about 7:15 p.m, having passed a 6-story block of flats, believed to be Musgrave Court, in a storage room, he said he removed his bloody clothes, put on an old boiler suit, threw away his rings, climbed over the railings of a 3rd-floor walkway, and just like his friend, known only as P1 just 4 years before,
I wanted to end it by throwing myself head first.
But having second thoughts, he slipped and fell 35 feet onto the concrete. Rushed to St Thomas's Hospital with severe fractures to his legs and ankles. Bilateral pins were inserted into his heels and he was placed into traction. A drug test revealed a weak positive for cannabis, proving that he hadn't smoked any in at least 2 to 3 days. And with the police still searching for him, he kept muttering to a nurse a number. It was the phone number of Nisha's shop, and later that day he was arrested. Discharged on the 25th of March 1993, he was charged with Nisha's murder and the wounding with intent of her brother Bobby. In a police interview, he gave a wholly delusional account of his motive and expressed no remorse for Nisha or her family. A psychiatrist later stated,
"He displays a remarkable lack of concern and an eerie emotional detachment to the killing. Being cold and indifferent, he regarded the event as a matter of great regret, as now he was crippled and facing a bleak future."
Peter had taken her life, with his expression as lifeless as if he had taken her lunch money. And yet he wasn't entirely broken or devoid of emotion. Awaiting trial, he was held at Brixton Prison, a crumbling Victorian Category C jail, famed as cold, harsh and brutal. With a wealth of evidence against him, if convicted of willful murder, he risks being sent down for a life sentence, which is a very long time for a young man who's never served a day in prison. In his first weeks, he launched 2 unprovoked attacks on fellow inmates, one while still in a wheelchair. He was violent, aggressive, uncontrollable, and was often segregated for the safety of the other prisoners. Assessed by the prison doctor and later psychiatric nurses from Homerton Hospital, his paranoia and anxiety
was a reaction to the prison itself.
But when removed,
he was polite and cooperative, quiet and withdrawn.
He spoke openly of the murder, his love for Nisha, and the abuse within his family. In hour-long interviews with clinicians, he said of how the police watched him and strangers conspired against him. As a Christian who believed in ghosts, he said that
dead souls listen to my conversations
and then hurt him if he doesn't obey, as prior to the killing, his right ankle was tingling. Raised to Caribbean parents, he said he used voodoo to quell his demons. And having no prior convictions for violence, he said he didn't know why he had murdered Nisha, but that a dark force and voices were pulling him closer. And yet he did admit, after he had battered her to death,
"I got an appetite, a thrill from the killing."
On the 24th of November, prior to his trial, assessed to consider his admission to Rampton Psychiatric Hospital, the forensic psychiatrist of Brixton Prison stated,
"I found his mental state hard to assess. Although I'm confident that he suffers from a psychotic illness, his symptoms are not well defined."
Certified as fit to plead, Peter Bryan was tried at the Old Bailey on the 25th of February 1994. Said to be floridly psychotic at the time of the murder, he pleaded not guilty of wounding with intent and not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter and wounding owing to diminished responsibility. Satisfying the criteria, on the 4th of March 1994, under sections 37 and 41 of the Mental Health Act 1983, he was sentenced to a hospital order without limitation of time, meaning that, for as long as he is believed to be a threat to the public, he shall remain locked up at Rampton High Security Psychiatric Hospital. It was said,
"He may never be released."
But was this diagnosis a mistake? Was it a quirk of his sickness? Or was he manipulating both so this first-time murderer could escape the prison time that he feared? His history of mental decline suggested that his symptoms were real, and his killing was the work of a man who was not in control of his faculties. But 3 months before his trial, he sent Nisha's father a letter which they would state showed that he was not insane, and should have been tried for murder. Dated the 22nd of November 1993 and sent from Brixton Prison. In neat handwriting, with no grammatical errors, corrections or spelling mistakes, he wrote,
Dear Michael, I'm writing to say how very, very, very sorry I am. I would have liked to have been part of your family, but due to this situation, this does not look possible. Telling Nisha that I loved her over and over again does not work. Really, Michael, if there was a problem with the colour of me, you're selling yourself cheap. So if you would be so kind as to send my clothes to HMP Brixton, I would be very, very, very happy. In my mind, Nisha will always be alive, and sooner or later, I will meet her again, and no one will be able to tell me to keep away from your daughter. Good luck, Peter.
Followed by a list of his bloodied clothes he wore when he slaughtered Michael's daughter. To this grieving family, it was a psychological slap in the face, as if the killer was laughing at them. On the 17th of December 1993, prior to his trial, Peter was admitted to Rampton, one of 3 high-security hospitals in England, alongside Ashworth and Broadmoor, where he would later be incarcerated. Whenever Rampton is mentioned, the media relies on a painfully tried list of the most heinous criminals to have graced its wards, like serial killer Beverly Allett, kidnapper Ian Ball, and rapist David Carrick, as well as which were paranoid schizophrenics, as if this detail embeds in the reader's mind the idea that all sufferers of psychosis are somehow drooling psychopaths. Many of the most infamous schizophrenics were killers, just as the majority remain forgotten. But just as many have used their mental illness to improve our lives, such as Syd Barrett from Pink Floyd, Václav Nijinsky the ballet dancer, artist Louis Wayne, author Robert Vassler, Professor Ellen Sachs, and John Nash, the Nobel Prize-winning mathematician, as featured in the film A Beautiful Mind. Throughout their lives, they all suffered and struggled with delusions, hallucinations, and paranoia. But whereas they channeled their mental disorder into a career or creativity, Peter's outlet was drugs. Writer Mark Vonnegut wrote,
The voices weren't much fun. Part of it was my being uncomfortable about hearing them, no matter what they had to say. But the early ones were mostly bearers of bad news.
Judge Dr. Daniel Schreiber said,
It was as if single nights had the duration of centuries.
John Nash said it wasn't always about suffering.
I think mental illness can also be an escape.
And Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys said,
Of my 40 years of auditory hallucinations inside my head, all day, every day, the voices say something derogatory to me, but I have to be strong enough to say to them, Hey, would you quit stalking me? Leave me alone. I have to say this type of thing all day long. It's like a fight.
But how could Peter fight the supposed demons inside his mind if he was high on illicit drugs? His first 6 months at Rampton were difficult, but not unusual. On the 25th of January, one of his first reports stated,
He presents some issues, but his behaviour is appropriate.
It said he got excited seeing blood while watching Alien 3. He stated,
I should be in America. Over there, kids of 8 go round with Uzis.
And when recalling his own crime,
he appeared dissociated and vague.
He had suicidal thoughts. He bragged about wanting to be a serial killer. He made homemade hooch in his room, and he threatened to kill the staff twice. At Rampton, this was all normal for a new patient whose diagnosis was still being assessed. With every interaction and incident reported, on the 7th of July 1995, He allegedly exposed himself in the showers while erect to a female cleaner. He denied this, and it was deemed an accident. On the 1st of August, he burned a different cleaner with a cigarette, but later apologized. On the 20th of September, he mocked Nisha's death, stating,
"The Packy had it coming."
And on the 18th of February 1996, he said to a nurse that if he ever got out, he had some unfinished business, which would lead to his rearrest. Again, outside of Rampton, that would be concerning. But inside, it was noted and evaluated. On the 17th of May 1994, for the first time in his life, Peter was prescribed an antipsychotic medication, 10 milligrams of zuclopentixel.
And he improved markedly over the next 2 to 3 months.
Stopped in August.
Suicidality and sexually disinhibited behaviour returned.
So it was restarted and he settled. Away from life's stresses like his family, and with no access to drugs like skunk.
The staff thought he'd made considerable progress regarding his behaviour, attitude, maturity, anger and insight.
He slept soundly, he ate his meals, he took his medication, and he seemed to be willing to get well. He had his ups and downs, but then again, who doesn't? And every day, he seemed to be one step closer to being a better person. Several years in, being described as a model patient, he bettered himself by attending an upholstery workshop, and he personally requested anger management and sex education. He regularly went to the gym as he still required therapy for his fractured ankles. By April 1999, his responsible medical officer, the RMO, wrote to the Home Office and Peter was granted 6 day passes to go shopping in a local town. And escorted by a guard and a nurse, they passed without incident. And when interviewed on the 17th of March 2001 by a psychiatrist, at the request of his solicitor in preparation for his tribunal, Peter stated,
"I am remorseful. I have destroyed Nisha's life."
And although he still believed that she had rejected him, he said,
"It was not justifiable. I was ill at the time. Most definitely the skunk was part of it."
That year, Peter's diagnosis of schizophrenia was reassessed. With it reported at the time of the murder,
he was suffering a paranoid psychosis, exacerbated by stress. But the fact that he didn't display any symptoms of schizophrenia other than paranoia was an important factor.
A later report states,
"Mr. Bryan is a cheerful and relaxed young man who has cooperated fully with the psychological assessment. He has spoken openly and honestly about his background, his offence and his situation, and it is likely that he has a predisposition for mental illness exacerbated by stress."
as seen with his older brothers. At his mental health tribunal in January 2001, it was said,
"Mr. Bryan has posed no significant management problem. However, it is questionable as to what extent he is being managed by his medication."
2 months later, a tribunal ruled,
"He can be conditionally discharged, provided that he takes his antipsychotic medication."
with a plan to transfer him from high-security Rampton to a medium-security unit on a 6-month trial, which, if he passed, he would be moved to a low-security hostel in the community. If he had been convicted of murder, he would have spent 24 hours a day for at least 20 years in prison. But given a hospital order without limitation of time, from which it was said he may never be released, in just over 8 years, he was close to being free. Months prior, the inquest papers state that a man known only as Social Worker 4 gave a stark warning in an ongoing assessment, stating,
Peter is very resourceful. He is cooperative, but in a superficial way, and mostly complies because he believes that it's the best way to achieve his conditional discharge.
His 6-month trial began on the 12th of July 2001, when Peter was escorted by staff to the John Howard Centre, part of Homerton Hospital, a medium-secure psychiatric unit in East London. Assessed, in the first weeks, his mood was typical of new patients being a little down and withdrawn. He was verbally but not physically hostile to staff, which was blamed on his upbringing,
having no real coping strategies and a lack of structure in his life.
He made some inappropriate comments to female staff, but he wasn't aggressively sexual. He admitted his attraction to Indian girls. He made racist remarks like,
"You know us darkies can't read."
And he accused some doctors of using white magic on him. He was doing better, but he would never miraculously be well, skipping through the hospital gates and singing, "I'm cured, I'm cured." Because if he was a schizophrenic, he would always be a schizophrenic. Every day, he would have hallucinations, delusions, and persecutions, just like Brian Wilson and John Nash. But it was about how well he managed these symptoms, so he could try and live as normal a life as possible in society, without endangering himself or others. And right then, he wasn't out of control. "5 months. Said to be a model patient, to acclimatise him to the real world, he went on escorted trips to Victoria Park, later to the National Portrait Gallery, where he enjoyed discussing art, to watch the new Harry Potter film, which he liked, and to a local pub where he played pool and had a pint of beer. And according to his occupational therapist,
he was stable, with no signs of psychosis.
4 months. A progress report stated,
Mr. Bryan's mental state has remained stable, free from psychotic symptoms, and he is compliant with his medication. He is polite, appropriate, and has not been a management problem on the ward. Mr. Bryan was always appropriately dressed, punctual for meetings, and apologetic when late for reasons beyond his control. He made intense eye contact, related warmly, and established an easy rapport. There were no overt signs of psychotic or mood disorder, and he asked for clarification about his community support once discharged from hospital.
3 months. Given his constant stability, Social Worker 4 would, in the months prior and ahead, write 3 times to the Home Secretary asking for Peter to be released, stating,
there was no change in his mental state. He posed no further threat. He does not present a grave and immediate danger to the safety of other persons.
Even though he still had
delusions about the killing of Nisha, continued to push the boundaries, and was thought to be a risk towards some Asian women.
2 months. In the aftermath, when after his release, Peter committed a suspected sex attack on a girl, 2 more brutal and unprovoked murders, and a barbaric act of cannibalism. Many have accused the mental health system of protecting their own and finding a scapegoat. First was an unnamed psychiatrist who had never assessed a patient convicted of murder. But the main fall guy was Social Worker 4. Having leaked his name to the press, Roland Silcott was young, inexperienced,
and had been a social worker for only 5 months, and had no mental health training, let alone with offenders.
He took the blame, but he hadn't the power to release a convicted murderer into the community. That took a team of psychiatrists, nurses, lawyers, judges, and even politicians, all of whom got to remain anonymous. Roland wouldn't face any disciplinary action, and yet neither did those who put him in that position. 1 month. In January 2002, an anonymous 3-member mental health tribunal, consisting of a social worker, a psychiatrist, and a High Court judge, met in secret and agreed, against the Home Office advice, to release Peter Bryan to a hostel where he could come and go as he pleased. Described as one of the most compliant patients I have ever come across, having completed his 6-month trial without any incident and making good progress. On the 12th of February 2002, 32-year-old Peter Bryan was released from the John Howard Centre from further psychiatric care at Rampton, and his hospital order without limitation of time for the murder of Nisha Sheth just 9 years before. Nisha's mother would state, "It is terrible. He shouldn't be out. He shouldn't be alive." And yet, having served just 8 years, 11 months and 6 days, he was now being escorted to a low-security hostel just miles from his home, where he would continue to be monitored and assessed. But he would have his own room, his own clothes and his own key, as well as a job, friends and a sex life, while Nisha's family still grieved. Peter Bryan was declared no longer a danger to the public. And yet, with his unfinished business, it took a further catalogue of blunders to turn this one-time murderer into a cannibal and a serial killer. Part 3 of Schizophrenic, The Real Fake Peter Bryan, continues next week.